Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 29th of January 2024. Let's get straight to the front line. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please pause the video and check out the key. So as we can see, a number of changes to the front line. Actually, all of these areas signify quite a few pins, thanks to JR, who has done some fabulous work on the mapping today. As ever, when we look to the northeastern sector from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea, there's a lot of talk about this area. So this is where the Russians took the village of Krokmalna, this small village here of sort of, I think, was it 45 people before the war. It's just a couple of houses there. Well, that has been an area where the Russians have made some continued gains, both north of there and indeed, as we can see today, according to Surat maps, west of there as well. There is supposed to be, or the Russians have supposedly taken this village of Avdiivka, another very small settlement in the rural area around there. Deep state map showing some actually Ukrainian gains pushing the Russians back, or at least redrawing the gains somewhat from where they previously were. But Surat Maps has a very confident Russian set of gains right up and down this whole area. Andriy Perpetua a little bit more conservative, waiting to see, I guess, how things go. If we go to some of the sources, Null reports here says Ukrainian Armed Forces spokesman Fitio denied the information that Russia captured the village of Avdiivka. Quote, regarding the information that Russia would have already captured Avdiivka, this is not true. Battles are currently taking place in Avdiivka. Our defenders are trying to dislodge them from the positions where they have temporarily found themselves. So obviously a bit of a grey zone, tough fighting around there. Julian Röpke from the German newspaper Der Bild saying a critical situation is also emerging in eastern Kharkiv Oblast, where Russian invasion forces broke through the far too thinly manned Ukrainian front and captured Avdiivka and Krokmalna, or Krokmalna was the other day. Russians are pushing towards Pischane, and only the Oskil River lies behind it. I mean, that's quite doom and gloom, which is a little bit like what Julian Röpke is like. I mean, yeah, okay, there's still quite a distance to the Oskil River there, but nonetheless, that is the claim. There's Pischane that he's talking about. So you've got Krokmalna and Avdiivka there. Whether it's been taken, I don't know for sure. It is not that serious, though. I mean, I've said previously a number of times, most of this land here isn't particularly operationally significant. I mean, my opinion is the Ukrainians could lose all of this area here, as long as Liman doesn't go, but basically something like that, and it's not going to make any difference to the outcome of the war, any difference to anything particularly other than PR. And so if the Ukrainians are going to cede this land, you just hope that they're doing it without losing too many soldiers themselves, and also with exacting a cost on the Russians. Surat Map says the situation in the northeastern front, clashes between the Russian and Ukrainian armies continue in the western hills of Avdiivka. It's not true about the recapture of the village by Ukrainian forces. So he's saying that the Russians have captured it and the Ukrainians haven't recaptured it. However, Avdiivka won't be fully secured until the capture of the hills. On the other hand, Russian troops advance southwest of Krokmalna in the direction of Pischane, and should be the next objective of this local offensive, which is to say that so there are some claims that the Ukrainians have taken back land, which looks rather like what Deep State Map has, but Surat Maps denies that. The Institute for the Study of War, the American military think tank, says Ukrainian Ground Forces commander Colonel Fitio stated that Russian forces continue to prioritize this whole Kupiansk direction, and that Russian combat activity is more intense along the Kupiansk to Liman line than around Bakhmut. Fitio added that Russian forces may shift their offensive focus from Kupiansk to elsewhere in eastern Ukraine, and observed that Russian forces have increased their use of loitering munitions from 20 to 30 drones a day to 40 drones per day. It's a little bit confusing. So that's to say that Fitio believes that it's more active around this area, more active than Bakhmut, but they could shift it to somewhere else. So, there is that. And that they are using more drones, FPV drones or loitering munitions in this area, as they are in a number of places, apparently, according to the ISW, and we'll come back onto that soon. It does mention Avdiivka, but not too much in terms of the latest detail. I guess it's quite dynamic there at the moment, so I guess we'll have to wait to see. Geolocated footage published yesterday indicates that Russian forces advance in the field east of Yampolivka. Actually, I haven't checked that out as far as the geolocation is concerned, so apologies there, but that's down here by this salience coming to the west. There's Yampolivka, so perhaps some gains here, but no doubt that would be a pin that's something like that, as according to most sort of ISW gains are within what we already have down with the mappers that we have. I think, generally speaking, the ISW is sort of a day behind anyway, due to the way they do reporting and how I pick their reports up, and the mappers I use are just much more current, and they wait for a single daily report that takes into account often last 48 hours worth of activity. The ISW still an incredibly useful resource, of course. Now, as we come further to the south, we come to Bakhmut, where there is not a lot of change. In fact, no change there. When we come to the ISW, just positional fighting taking there. So that kind of reflects maybe what Fitchio was saying, that the fighting in the Bakhmut area is not as intense as up in the northeastern axis. We come now to Avdiivka. Avdiivka is obviously, seen an awful lot of fighting around this cauldron and slightly to the south of the cauldron as well. Seems to have stabilized somewhat in this northern area around Stepova along the railway line and further north towards Novobakhmutivka. Indeed, not much movement around the Vesely area and the Kamyanka area in this northern part of the inner cauldron. We do have some changes, and I think they're quite significant changes, but nothing unexpected as far as Andrew Perpetua is concerned. So he had his lines up pretty much where the yellow lines of Deep State Map are there. He's pulled back the Russian control zone and changed it to grey zone. So this entire area of Dachas to the south of Avdiivka, and indeed Tsarska Ohota, is also a grey area, as it was yesterday, and it's more to do with control of the forest a little bit to the west of the restaurant complex there. This is quite significant, and certainly not what Surat Maps is agreeing to at the moment. Deep State Map slightly in between the two mappers, but I would favour Andrew Perpetua here. I think he's probably on the money. There is quite a few pieces of footage to support this claim, just to add that there's a little bit of a game for the Russians somewhere further north of the industrial sector here. But we'll go back to the Tsarska Ohota area, where there is a Telegram video here that does give you some. In fact, I will show you a little bit of it. Let's just translate what it says, though. I don't know if I can. But this video shows both a Bradley and an APC of the Ukrainians active around the Tsarska Ohota restaurant area. This was geolocated by JR. Actually, he sent this to me on the back channel, saying, "Look, here is some activity there that defends the idea that the Russians have been pushed back from that area. Our fighters repulsed another counterattack of the armed forces of Ukraine on Tsarskaya Ohota near Avdiivka. Our assault groups are advancing, but the enemy is trying to counterattack the lost positions. Situation is dynamic. The video shows the work of FPV drones of the French group and other units of the Russian armed forces. After practicing with the FPV, the enemy has 4 confirmed 200s. I can't see that. I have to see it on Telegram. Unfortunately, that does show... I promise you, it does show a Bradley and an APC active there. So that's the Ukrainians pushing back on the Russians. Let's just give me 2 ticks. So JR just sent me this really quick screen grab saying, look, that's a Bradley, that's the APC, that's the Tsarska Ohota restaurant complex. It's now somewhat rubbly. And that just shows that the Ukrainians are active there with mechanized equipment in a way that the Russians aren't. This is this area. At least that's what he was saying. So I take that on, and I think that supports the idea that the Russians are it is dynamic, but they are being pushed back from there, possibly as a result of not having too much mechanized equipment. The ISW says Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces expanded their zone of control near the Tsarska Ochota restaurant on Avdiivka's southern outskirts, with one mill blogger claiming there were unconfirmed reports that Russian forces completely control the restaurant. Then it says a Ukrainian serviceman serving in the Avdiivka direction stated that Ukrainian forces pushed Russian forces out of the Tsarska Ochota restaurant, and that Russian forces are constantly changing their tactics in the Avdiivka direction. So who knows? A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are struggling to advance since the wedge in which Russian assault groups and detachments are operating is too narrow, likely referring to the Avdiivka's southern outskirts. That's going to be to say that this area is too narrow for them to get, huge amounts of equipment through, and they're getting hit, I would have thought, by the Ukrainians a different way. So difficult dynamic. Who knows? It seems that Andrew Perpetua is confident enough to say that the Russians have been pushed back and it's a grey zone. It doesn't mean to say Russians aren't still present there. It is just contested. Both sides are fighting over it. And in fact, that video, I'll put that Telegram video in the link below, but if I remember, but it showed, that's a Russian video showing, Russian activity, as well as showing those Ukrainian pieces of equipment. Right. Some gains for the Russians, possibly just north of Opytny, as according to Deep State map there, and some gains in the Pervomaysky area in line with what Suret Maps had changes. They showed changes there. I think it was yesterday or the day before. So a bit of agreement in the mapping from those two sources. So it's still challenging. The Russians are still making some gains here and there. And then when we come down further to the south, we have some fairly substantial gains around this area between Marinka and Novomykhailivka. And indeed, this is a little bit challenging. There's this, I think it's this area there that is a bit of a fortification that the Russians are in control of, unless it's no, it might be this one there. There's a number of them, as you can see here, there, and then in this tree line as well. The fortifications that the Russians, they now appear to control all of them. Andrew Perpetua has moved the gain line for the Russians quite far forward there. Suret Maps has changed a little bit in this area, and Deep State Map too. So basically some fairly significant gains for the Russians north of Novomykhailivka, which will certainly be a challenge for the Ukrainians. Here it is. So Suret Maps here saying the Russian army managed to re-enter the Zverinets stronghold and expanded the control over new tree belts west and southwest of their positions there. So that's fairly significant land to be taking, and a little bit of a worry in terms of Novomykhailivka, because it could end up being partially encircled. It could be that the Russians create another cauldron there. That will be challenging for the Ukrainians. When we come to the rest of the front line, mainly sort of claims of positional fighting, as mentioned in the ISW. There is a little bit to say about the Robotyne area, but actually some gains, as according to Suret Maps, in the Velika Novosilka area, just to the north. Is it the north of Pryutne? Somewhere we haven't mentioned for a long time, just a tree line that the Russians have made an advance along. This forest has been an area of clashes since the summer of 2023, as Russian troops wanted to expand the buffer zone around Pryutne and moving the front line to the lakes for a better defense. Just up there, but so a little bit of a gain for the Russians there. We're going to go to the ISW now to look at the Robotyne area, which is a Russian mill blogger claiming that Ukrainian forces regained several positions west of Robotyne, although ISW has not confirmed that. So this is the area here where we have had several days this week of claims that the Russians have made some gains, the Ukrainians have made some gains, Russians have made some gains. So I presume it's fairly dynamic in that area, as well as, we've seen activity to the north of Verbove as well, but no changes there, no changes formally with any of the mappers. And finally, obviously, we come to the Dnipro River and Krinky again. We just zoom in, no change to the front line there with any of the mappers. We do have quite a bit in the ISW. Positional engagements continued, but there were no confirmed changes. Southern Operational Command spokesperson Humanyuk reported that Russian forces will likely soon conduct a troop rotation in the Kherson direction. So that's a challenge for the Ukrainians as the Russians get fresh troops. because Russian forces are having difficulties forming assault groups due to recent high casualties. So the good news is that that's as a result of high casualties. Humenyuk stated that the Russian command continues to prohibit Russian forces from using vehicles during assaults in the Kherson direction, and that Russian forces often conduct infantry attacks in groups of 10 or 15 personnel. Humenyuk also stated that Russian forces have intensified the use of first-person view drones, a bit like up in Kupiansk area, in the Kherson Oblast, to drop munitions on Ukrainian positions and populated areas in the past several days. This is an area where electronic warfare is a prevalent factor in both sides and how they operate. Magyar's birds are operating a lot around here, and other units of drone operators, as well as Russian units. The Moses unit was taken out, but there are lots of Russian units, lots of Russian drones operating in that area. It is pretty tough going for both sides. We talked about the lost stats concerning Krinky in this morning's first video, so if you want to go and check that out, please do. Otherwise, thank you very much. That's the end of the Frontline update for today. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Quite a bit of change in a number of these places. A few places not looking very good for the Ukrainians. That northern Avdiivka area, and particularly the area around the Zverinets fortification just south of Marinka and north of Novomokilivka is a real challenge. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.